otaku, geeks, dweebs, nerds, and other unfortunates have been fervently waiting for has finally arrived. It's time for TMI, Confessionals of the Nerd Kind. And now, your hosts, Jeff Nerf Herder Chandler, Jim Kaiju Baker, and Christina Yojimbo Henry. You can continue. And now, let's get on with the show. Here is TMI.
All right, so shall we get into this one?
Let's go.
Are you ready? Do you have your tea?
I have my tea and my 8 pages of notes.
Okay.
And
All right. So this is a 5-bucket episode.
Woo, I believe that if a certain member of this team could make it a 10 bucket, they would.
Mm-hmm. It'd be 100 buckets.
Yeah,
100 buckets. That's a lot of popcorn right there, my friend.
The dial goes to 11 on this.
There you
Definitely
go.
does.
So what do we got? Christina, please bring this episode.
Bring us in.
Okay, so Yojimbo, directed by Akira Kurosawa, starring my favorite actor, Toshiro Mifune, which was released in 1961.
By Toho Studios.
By
Yep.
Toho Studios, yes. Kurosawa was with Toho for most of his career. And at the time, really, there was only one other option, which was Dai anyway. So they were the only other major production studio in Japan. Roughly, the plot is Toshiro Mifune plays a character who calls himself Sanjuro, which is a joke. And I'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Well, I was going to say I'll talk a little bit about it later, but so...
Because he just makes up the name on the spot, right? They ask him his name. It's like, yeah, here's my name. And then he looks out the window and gives him a name.
So in Japanese, Sanju means 30. He says, they ask him what his name is, and he says, Kuwabataki Sanjuro. And Kuwabataki is the mulberry field, which is
what
he's looking at
right.
when he answers the question. And Sanjuro means 30 years old. So he says, so his name means 30-year-old mulberry field. And then he says, but I'm closer to 40.
Okay.
But you don't find this out until about 20-odd minutes.
I was going to say, this is well into the movie when you were introduced to him.
So basically, he's a man with no identity. He's a Ronin. Which is a masterless samurai, and he's pretty down on his luck. If you look at him, you know his kimono's a little raggedy. His sandals don't look so great. And at the beginning of the movie, he's walking along a road, and he comes to a crossroads. He picks up a stick. He throws it into the air, and he decides wherever it lands,
that's the way he's going to go.
That's the way he's going to go.
And I love that.
He regrets it.
I love it.
He immediately regrets that he's following a stick.
But he doesn't care because he doesn't have a purpose. He doesn't have a lord, and he has nothing going for him. So why not? So he
that's by choice, because he's given the opportunity to say his name, and he still decides to remain anonymous, because the name Sanjuro sounds to English audiences like a name, right? But that's correct. Like, if you were watching this in English, that would be like him saying mulberry field. When they ask him, because it means nothing, and they still don't know his name.
Right. So he encounters a father and son who are arguing. And the son says, I don't want to spend a life eating gruel. I'm running away. He wants to make money. He doesn't want to be poor. And the Sanjuro stops to drink from the bucket at this farm, and he overhears the farmer and his wife talking about some of the troubles that are occurring in the town ahead. And it's just a little taste of what he's about to encounter. And then Sanjuro comes into this town, And it's very silent. All the windows are boarded up. There's people sort of looking suspiciously from windows and doorways, but nobody comes out. He walks down the street, and the first things he sees is a dog carrying a human hand.
Which pretty much sets the tone for this entire movie. You're right there. You're like, oh, man.
And he discovers very soon that the town is basically being fought over by two rival gangs who are backed by, respectively, a sake brewer and a silk merchant, who are sort of the wealth behind these two gangs. And because of the constant infighting, the town has basically shut down. And he decides that he's got nothing better to do, so he's going to stay and maybe see if he can get the two gangs to destroy each other.
Yeah, because he's bored.
Yeah, it's not like
what it comes down to.
It's really not like he's looking for a
he's not like some honorable guy coming in going, we'll set things right. He's like, let's see how this plays out.
But it's not even for money. It's just for entertainment, really. The money.
Yeah, no, I thought that's great.
And one of the things I think that, you have to remember that this is 1961. So since then, we've seen a lot of movies with these kinds of anti-heroes and things like that. But at the time, this is a very, very subversive character and a very, very subversive movie, because samurai were always depicted as sort of noble and honorable, and they had like a very strong moral center. And of course, the very act of being a samurai meant that you had a long and distinguished family tree. He has no name, he has no history, and he seems to have no moral center. So he just the fact that this character even existed on film at the time was incredibly revelatory. And Mifune is at his absolute best in this film. He's so physically powerful. His charisma is tremendous. It just pours off the screen.
Yeah, like this guy hasn't done anything yet, and you're immediately like, he's a badass. Like just the way he walks into town, and you're just like.
But you can tell that this had such a heavy impact on audiences or filmmakers, more specifically, around the world. Like every Western, especially the Clint Eastwood. Okay,
well, we'll talk about that later.
Because
rips
the thing,
this off.
Yeah, because I watched this twice. I mentioned this off camera. I watched it first time and then started doing a little bit of research and immediately was like, wait a minute, because not coming to the table with this knowledge of, the samurai and the way they've been portrayed on film before, and the fact that it kept being referred to as a dark comedy. Now, yes, there are moments in this where you kind of chuckle out loud. There's some great lines. And I literally had to stop myself and be like, hold on, did I even watch the same freaking movie?
Right. So but I think that they describe it as that because of the character, because just what Christina was saying, it's so subversive, and that's a very good.
But if you don't know the history of that, you don't realize, you just take it for face value. If you just turning this movie on, you're like, oh, here's this, this movie friggin' ripped off Fistful of Dollars. It's the same story, right? Like, you don't know the history of it, then you come to it and you just take it at face value. But when I went back and I rewatched it with the commentary, and I'm sure that Christine's going to take us through every step of this, it made me see this in a completely different way and appreciate it for what it is. And the fact that it was so revolutionary for a 60s movie to portray these characters like this in this Japanese culture, it swayed the way I watched it the second time.
The scene that Christina was just talking about, where he enters the town and then you see the dog run by with the hand, that is just such an iconic, like a high noon kind of a shot where he's centered completely. The crispness of the black and white. I could not imagine the movie being in color. I think the black and white actually serves it.
I was going to say, I think that color might have taken something away from it because it is so stark. in certain aspects, and we'll get into like the camera work, which is just phenomenal on this. And he shot this in CinemaScope.
Right, and they use telephoto lenses, which
Oh
is,
yeah, oh very
like,
evident.
Mm.
Which
yeah.
again, you go in and you see where that was just blatantly stolen a lot of times in some of the other movies.
So one of the things that's interesting when Jim was talking about the look of the film. So Kazuo Miyagawa was the cinematographer on Rashomon. It has a very, very distinctive look, especially lighting wise. Miyagawa tends to center things like sort of like bang on, in the middle. Right. But camera B was operated by Takao Sato. He wanted to do something that wasn't exactly like Miyagawa. So
that's usually, go ahead.
Yeah, so Kurosawa said to him, I think the film is going to have that very beautiful Miyagawa look, but you just go ahead and experiment.
Yeah.
So Saito does a lot of sort of interesting tilts and pans. And you can almost tell shot for shot, like whose camera you're
absolutely.
You're looking at in the film. But a lot of Saito's shots ended up being used in the film.
And it's, like you said, it's very evident because B camera shooting is usually it's the wider shot. Mm-hmm. It's usually you're getting all the action while the A camera is getting the main action with the characters interacting with each other, whatever. And it was the complete opposite, because the one thing that you notice right off the bat is that this character, right in the opening shot, it's a tracking shot where they're following him, and you see him from his back from the beginning,
right?
And he just fills the screen.
Yes.
You're not seeing anything past his hips. You're not seeing anything past his shoulders, and he's just this huge, imposing character that's larger than life. And they use that a lot throughout this to really kind of bring home, this character's presence. And it's funny because Spielberg kind of did the same thing a little bit in the opening of Raiders. That's kind of how he introduced Indiana Jones.
Spielberg was a fan of Kurosawa.
There you go.
Yes.
So you see the influences, but it's really unbelievable. And we'll talk more about that B camera work. They were playing with this new format, this wide Panavision format that wasn't necessarily, wide. I mean, not a lot of, cinemas were showing it in this, aspect ratio. And he just went to town with it. It is unbelievable.
Right. But when he is centered, it's like textbook. It looks so perfect. So it's just it's a juxtaposition.
Yes.
One of the things that we'll talk more about the scenes later, but there's a lot of scenes where Kurosawa really uses the width of the frame to his advantage, especially in the scene when Sanjuro provokes the gangs into the street fight.
When he's up on the perch, when he's up on the watchtower.
Yeah, he's on the fire tower.
Example of that. Yeah. He is center frame, and you just see from both sides of the screen these imposing war tribes kind of moving in on each other, and he's just sitting there like he's just kind of like all right, this is my entertainment for the day.
And I love how he just, with not a care in the world, pulls his arms into his kimono and is at rest most of the time. He's just kind of very sharply observing everybody, and the only other one to really do that to any other effect is kind of almost copying him or copying what a tough guy should be, who's the brother.
Yeah, because he's not concerned. Like you would think your hand would be on the hilt of your friggin' sword the entire time, going, dude, don't mess with me. And he's not. He's just kind of like, he's
keeping his arms warm.
There you go.
So that's what he's doing. And you're in trouble when his arms come through the sleeves. Like that's when
he's kind of
that's when it's all over. So like the first time he encounters one of the gang, first of all, he meets the constable who comes out and says, hey, do you want to get a job as a bodyguard? Like, if you do, basically give me this kickback. Sandro doesn't say anything. It's kind of like, okay. And then he just sort of keeps walking, and he encounters one of the gangs in the street. And they all come out, all these yakuza, and they sort of they're posing and saying, I'm so tough.
Right.
And
they got tattoos.
And he says, he doesn't say anything. He just kind of turns and walks away. They're like, oh, even dogs can pass through, but he doesn't have time for them. So he just kind of strolls away.
Isn't that where he tells them they have cute faces and that they're adorable?
No, that's later.
No, that's later.
Later.
But he does take
such a great line.
He does drink in the Japanese Richard Kiel, who's got the Donkey Kong.
That guy is just massive.
Kaneki is the character's name. He was a professional wrestler. in
Oh,
Japan.
wow.
So I think
He
if
would be wasted if he was not.
Right. But you're right, that mallet, that Donkey Kong sized mallet, he's like winging around.
You know, after he encounters these guys in the street, he sort of strolls away. He goes to this little inn and he meets Ganji, who's the innkeeper, and he says, you know, I'd like something to eat, but I don't have any money to pay for it. And Ganji says, fine, I don't care, just eat and leave, because like this town is nothing but trouble. And then Ganji sort of gives him the breakdown of what's going on, which is that Tozeman, who's a silk merchant, has a gang member who sort of works underneath him named Seibe. And Seibe, instead of sort of agreeing to leave, make the heir to his gang Ushitora, who was one of his lieutenants, he's decided to make his son Yoichiro his heir. And this really pissed off Ushitora. So he ran away to Tokuemon, who's the sake merchant, and said, let's start our own gang. And Tokuemon wants to take power from Tozeman. So he said, okay. So now there's this, you know, these two rival gangs. And Ushitora has two brothers, one of which is Inokichi, who's played wonderfully by Daisuke Kato as this completely foolish, literally stupid boar, you know, which is what Ino means. Ino means boar. And he even has this sort of boar-like makeup with this.
You know what he looks like? The redneck baby from The Simpsons with the unibrow.
Oh, yes.
The buck teeth. That's
actually,
what
it's funny
reminded
because
me of.
I said it's great to know that Griffin Dunn's a unibrow. This is where he got his start.
And then Ushitora has another brother, Unosuke, who's not introduced yet. He comes back later, but he's the real threat, actually.
Who comes strolling on like the Japanese Elvis, by the way. When he first...
Yeah.
So
he brings a gun to a sword fight.
Ganji sort of gives Sanjuro the lowdown, and then Sanjuro is like, what can I do to start trouble here? So he goes to Seibe's brothel, and he says, I'll be your bodyguard. I'll prove myself. Just watch. And he strolls back down the street to the gang members who originally taunted at him. And they all come out again. And this time he says, oh, look at all of your cute faces.
There you go. Yeah.
And then they start to get really mad. They're like, you know, I've committed every crime in the book.
We're wanted on 12 systems.
Right, exactly. Like, you know, I've done this, I've done that. He insults them to the point where they draw their swords, and then he puts his arms through his kimono and it's all over. He very quickly dispatches two of them, cuts off the arm of the third.
Literally disarmed him. Yep.
Yes. And then puts his sword back in the sheath, tucks his arms back inside his kimono, and walks away. And he tells the coffin maker, you're going to need 2 coffins. And then he looks back and says, better make that 3. And then he goes back to Seibe, having proved basically how tough he is, not only to Seibe, but to sort of everybody in the town who's seen this spectacle. And one of the things that we should know is that Toshiro Mifune did learn from a kendo master because Kurosawa always insisted that Mifune learn how to do stuff in the films. He doesn't have a stunt man. He does everything himself. And he, everybody who worked with him said that he was just obviously physically powerful, but incredibly fast. He just moves like lightning. So he goes and meets Seibe, and this is when you learn Sanjuro's quote-unquote name when he introduces himself. And you meet Seibe's wife, Orine.
Who is a despicable, she's probably the worst character in this whole movie.
Oh, yeah.
And she's Isuzu Yamada. She was the Lady Macbeth analog in Throne of Blood, and she's wonderful in that. And she's actually wonderful in this too. She's so good at making you despise her.
Yeah.
And she Sanjuro tells Seibe, you know, that he wants 50 Rio to be his bodyguard. Seibe agrees, and his wife's pissed off because she doesn't want that much outgo. Okay,
right.
She calls her husband and her son Yoichiro into a closet to have a little conference, wherein they decide that they'll use Sanjuro to help them defeat Ushitora, and then they will kill him afterwards.
Kill him.
Yeah. Meanwhile, he's listening.
He's
into this whole
listening right there.
conversation.
Yep. And
Yeah.
he's shushing all the geishas that are
And
seeing him
there's
listen.
that cute little right at the end of that. He sticks his tongue out at the game,
Yeah.
too, which is kind of like a cute little. I don't like I know they're playing kind of a thing.
But what's funny about this, as the plot goes on and all these machinations are going on, you realize that the only energy that he was planning on putting forth was that initial scene where he kills the two and then
Right.
possibly the third. Everything else was going to be playing the one gang against the other. Like
yeah.
he needed to do that little bit of action in order to establish himself as worthy of them both trying to vie for him.
Right.
So, then circumstances kind of careen from there. But that was his expenditure of energy, I think. And that's all he was planning on doing, and then set things forth into motion. And that's just so funny, that the way that the character thinks these things through, and you're discovering kind of what his agenda is.
Right. And there's a great scene. There's another sort of lead bodyguard, Homa, who is insulted that Seibe is going to give Sanjuro so much money.
Yeah, because he's the sword master here,
Right.
before Sanjuro comes into the picture.
Right. And I don't know if you recognized Susumu Fujita, but he played Tadokoro in Hidden Fortress, the general.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about this a little bit because I picked this up from the commentary that he was kind of Kurosawa's go-to guy.
Yeah,
that they actually kind of make fun of that with the fact that Mifune kind of replaced him.
Right. He's in well, he was like Kurosawa's leading man early on, so he's in Sanjuro Sagata, and he's in Those Who Step on the Tiger's Tail, and like some of the other sort of early Kurosawa films. So yeah, it is a little bit of a wink to the audience if you're familiar with Kurosawa's
right, and that's
work.
Again, you take it at face value, but when you start reading into this and you start watching this, and like especially the scene where he jumps the fence and he's running away, he literally turns.
Right, and smiles and waves goodbye.
Yeah. And to me, it was like, it's been done 100 times since with Schwarzenegger walking into a scene and kind of high-fiving Statham as he, all right, I'm passing the baton on to you.
Right.
So
that
was cute, actually.
And that scene happens just as Seibe's decided, okay, well, now I've got Sanjuro. I'm going to pick a fight with Ushitora. We're going to take him down in the street. And Sanjuro calmly walks downstairs, sees everybody sort of, set up to fight. Orin comes out with the match, the kiribi is what it's called. And she takes like a flint and she strikes the stone.
Oh yes,
yeah. So it's a custom called kiribi, and it's supposed to be where you send someone off by striking sparks against their back so that they are free from harm.
What if he caught on fire? That wouldn't be so good.
And then Sanjuro throws the money at her feet so that she's got to kneel down and pick it up, and says, "Here's your money. I don't like the way you do business." Like he's pissed, basically acting like he's pissed off because they said they were going to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
And then
which he should be. Which he should be.
But I don't think he really is, because Sanjuro's a character who expects the worst of people.
Right.
So I don't think that what they did was anything he didn't expect.
But as Jeff said, he sticks his tongue out at the girls after he hears that they're planning on killing him. Like, this is nothing,
Been there, done that.
Yeah.
So then he yells at Ushitora and says, "I've broken with Seibe, but now they're all in the street, right?"
Right.
So then you get this wonderful scene again where there's like this beautiful use of the widescreen where Sanjuro climbs the fire tower and sort of watches the results of his actions.
And the tower is framed in the middle, in that one shot.
Oh, yeah.
The tower is framed in the middle. And
the
gang are coming up on either the left and the right side of the screen. It's a great shot.
And they're moving. I love the way they move toward each other so hesitantly. Like their swords are shaking, and they're sort of inching toward each other. And they're inching
they're waiting for the other one to make the first move.
Right.
Like that would be to me, that's just a ridiculous way to fight. Like I would be like, dude, I'm done. No, forget it.
And this is Sanjuro's the catalyst, because these two gangs have been building towards a moment like this.
Right.
And he's been the catalyst that's needed in order to set this off. And you can tell that they haven't done this before, and they've just been posturing up until now.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately, Sanjuro is thwarted because the inspector from Edo shows up, and they have to stop. Everybody has to open up their windows and act like business is normal because
It's like the
inspector's
teacher
coming.
is showing up, right?
Right, correct.
Right.
Shh,
Because what would happen if like he suspected foul play? Then suddenly he would go back, and then like the armies would come and
Right.
straighten things out. Yeah.
But this leads to like one of my favorite scenes in the movie. So one of the things that I love is that they're always sort of using the windows and shutters and ganjis in like it's a sort of framing device.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yes. And Ganji is like the audience's key to
Surrogate.
all of
Yeah.
this. He was obviously apart from Sanjuro, he was my favorite character.
Sanjuro and Ganji are watching Hansuke, the constable, sort of fuss around the inspector and his minions. And then, first the mayor comes and hands something to Hansuke. And Hansuke goes first to the, one of the minions and then to the inspector and then to the other guy. He gives them a little tug on their kimono sleeve.
Right.
He puts a little bag next to them, right? And when he's done, he gets up, he sort of moves away, and then all of a sudden, in sync, like 1, 2, 3, they all pick up their bribes and they disappear into their kimono sleeves as if they were never there. Yeah. And it's such a great scene. And then
you're right, because the way that that's framed in the windows, it's almost like 3 separate little vignettes going on, but you get it from his point of view as they're sitting there watching this unfold, and it's But it's all. But again, you went into the telephoto lens, which is you're really forcing a lot of perspective, and things seem closer than they really are. Because you think that all they had to do is look to the left and like, oh, look at these 2 idiots looking at us. But apparently they were much farther away. It's just yeah. So.
And it's wonderful too because right after that is when Inokichi and Orin show up to sort of fight over Sanjuro, like who's going to hire him for when the inspector leaves. And if you look in the background, like the bribery is continuing as like Seibei shows up now to bribe the inspector, and Ushitora shows up to bribe the inspector. So like everybody is kind of coming to take their turn to pass the graft to the inspector from Edo. But I love when Inokichi first speaks to Sanjuro, and he's like, "I like you. You're tough." Like he's so impressed by Sanjuro's aura or something.
And no wonder why the inspector doesn't want to leave. He's getting bribed left
Sure.
and right. He's like,
I'll show up again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right. And Seibei shows up with lots of girls, right? So it's not just money, and but obviously, like from the point of view of the town, neither Tokuemon or Tozeman are making money right now because there's so much going on that there's supposed to be a silk fair,
right? Yeah,
right. There's no actual money being made, so they're expending a huge amount of money on these gangs at the moment, but they're not getting any return unless one of them can prevail over the other.
It makes you wonder why Ushitora wouldn't just pick up and leave. They could easily take over a town without a rival gang and just leave it to Seibei.
Well, I mean, obviously Tokuemon wants to stay because now he wants to triumph over Tozeman, right?
Yeah, because he would be he would be the new mayor. He is Ushitora's mayor of choice.
Right. They're in the middle of nowhere. It's not like there's another town just over the hill. You're not going to like pack up your army and like march them. These are, yakuza who are accustomed to not doing a lot of work.
That's apparent. Yeah, we're good.
So then, Ushitora hires a couple of his guys to go and murder someone somewhere else so that the inspector will leave because it's causing a problem.
Yeah. So the inspector will have to go inspect this murder once he hears about it.
Go check this out. I'll be back.
Right. And then Sandra overhears these two guys talking indiscriminately in Ganji's shop and realizes who they are and what they've done. So he
So this is what I'm talking about. How
Yeah.
I needed a family tree to
Right, to keep track of
list
the.
these events. Okay, this
All right,
event
these guys
leads
did
to
this. That's
Yep.
resulting in this.
And at this point, Inosuke, who is Ishitora's other brother, has returned from foreign lands. He's been away for a year. And the moment Inosuke comes in, you realize like he is going to be a spanner in Sanjuro's works because he's clearly smarter than
Yes.
anyone else.
Yeah.
And he is extremely pleased with himself every time you see him on screen.
And he's dangerous because he's smart, you know, because he's the only person who can come up with plans of his own, right? Besides Sanjuro. So, and I love the first moment when Inosuke and Sanjuro first encounter one another in the street, and Inokichi's actually between them. And he says, "Hey brother, have you seen this guy? He's really tough." Right? And Inosuke and Sanjuro don't speak, but there's almost like they're dogs scenting one another, right? They sort of, each of them kind of pauses, or like, you know, Sanjuro gets that little hitch in his shoulders, and they kind of eyeball each other and move away with
Sizing each other up. Yeah.
yeah, like they're definitely like, you already have this feeling that they're circling each other.
If he didn't have that pistol, would he be even half the threat that
Right.
he is?
Yeah.
Right. Well, he's not a samurai, you know.
Right,
He's not
right.
he's not a swordsman.
He's a punk.
Right. And there
He
were
should be hanging
rules-
out with Jodie Foster.
And there were really strict rules about like who could carry weapons. Samurai could carry weapons. I mean, yakuza were criminals, so they were not trained in sword fighting, and they legally could not carry them. But they obviously just did anyway. Sandro thinks, oh, well, I'll set this thing up where I'll take Hachi and Kuma, who are the two murderers, and try to set up a situation again where he can try to provoke a confrontation between Ushitora and Seibei. And Seibei thinks, oh, I'll blackmail Ushitora, you know, with these two guys. But it kind of backfires.
It doesn't work so well.
First, because Ushitora takes Yoichiro, Seibei's son, hostage, and then Inosuke flat out just shoots Hachi and Kuma in the street, like
these guys mean nothing to me. Funny because it still shows how Sanjuro is flipping sides constantly, yet they still both want him. They're not offended in any way when he comes back with the two guys that have killed the magistrate. Like,
right.
Oh, here we go. You know, I've changed my mind, and here's I'm with you now. So take these guys, and then he runs right over.
Right.
So, but it was interesting is Inosuke thinks he's totally outwitted Seibei by having Yoichiro, but then it turns out Seibei's thought one step ahead and has taken Tokoemon's mistress hostage as well.
Right. Who you don't know about until this moment. It's a surprise to you and
to him. Yeah.
Yeah, and the music just explodes.
We haven't even talked about the soundtrack yet, because this is right from the first introduction, the first note of this movie. It's
the
just,
brass, the horns of this
I am digging it. It's so unique. Yep.
Now this is Masaru Sato.
Yes.
And he did one or two of the later Godzilla movies. So I got that flavor.
You got that flavor? Yeah.
From Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, especially the 74 version. The horns are unmistakable that this was the same guy, and I had to look it up, and it was.
It's funny that you talk about Godzilla. I mean, obviously, like, actors who were on, like, the studio payroll appeared in a lot of, you know, Toho films, but Ikeo Sawamura, who plays Hansuke, you should recognize him because he's in a ton of Godzilla films.
Oh, were they all like this? Gojira!
but you're saying that how charismatic Mifune is.
Yes.
You know, being used to the style of acting that's in the Godzilla movies, even the gangsters, they're all very buttoned down guys. And nobody really stands out in terms of characterization in those movies. And Mifune is the exact opposite. He is so unconventional in terms of the Japanese movies that I'm familiar with from this period. He stands out immediately and is so likable. You could see why Westerns just attach themselves to this movie and to his character.
He was a photographer during World War II. And after the war was over, Obviously, Japan was financially devastated, and he went to Toho to try to become a camera operator because he knew how to use a camera. And he ended up somehow in this Toho New Faces audition.
Huh.
And so it's completely accidental. And he tried out, and Kurosawa saw him. And Kurosawa said that he was like a wild animal, like that he had just never seen that kind of intensity or that kind of passion, in Japanese acting before, especially because so much Japanese film was very similar to like kabuki theater, and it was very mannered. There was a very specific way of performing, and everything about Mifune was unconventional. But that was because he had not meant to be an actor,
Right.
Right.
So he didn't have preconceived
They had that.
notions of how to perform. And like one of his characteristics is, his physicality. In every one of his roles, he sort of creates these sort of physical mannerisms for the character. And obviously with Sandro, like, he has the shoulder hitch,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
His arms are inside his kimono. He chews on the toothpick. He has
Yep.
a very specific kind of walk, that's almost dance-like, but at the same time, like you can sense like his strength and his power. He's just amazing. And one of the things I think that's sort of underplayed, because the character is so tough, is Mifune's humor and warmth, which really comes through in this part. This absolutely mischievous humor.
And you're saying that the character has questionable morals, but they shine through in the scene coming up.
So what ends up happening is they have to negotiate basically another trade wherein Nui is traded for Yoichiro, right? And during this trade, Nui's husband, Kohei, comes to Ganji's inn with their son to try to get a glimpse of his wife. Now, his wife was taken from him by Ushitora and given to Tokuemon because he had gambling debts. And so now he lives in like a little hut that's near their old house and basically watches his wife get ravished by Tokuemon every day. But I think it's not necessarily Kohei's plight that moves Sanjuro. It's more Nui herself and of their son. Their son who's like reaching through the window calling for his mother.
Yeah.
It makes him angry, because he's feeling something.
Yeah.
And he
Like,
hates
son
to
of a-
be,
right.
he
Yep,
hates to feel things. So then after this, like things just escalate crazily because again, Sanjuro goes and pretends that he's going to work for Ushitora. Immediately, 2 seconds after Ushitora hires him, he says, well, we better make sure the woman is safe. And
Yeah, how many do you have guarding her? 6. Well, that's not enough.
Right.
Yeah.
So then he takes Inokichi, who's just so impressed to be in his presence, and they go off to Nui's house. He distracts Inokichi, says, don't you have to, beat up that guy over there?
Right.
So
Oh,
he-
yeah.
That's right. I haven't beaten him up yet today.
Right.
So
Thanks
he
for
said-
reminding me.
So he sends him Inokichi over to beat up Kohei, pretends to go in the house. This is important that he pretends to go in. And then comes back and says, everyone's been massacred. Go get Ushitora, right? And then in this wonderful, virtuosic, almost like choreographed scene.
It's like a ballet, really.
Yeah.
Because it's wanton destruction, but he is it's pretty impressive.
Because he has to stage it. So it looks like a gang has massacred these 6 guys and destroyed the room.
Right.
But he's literally just kind of like sweeping across the room, and he's just causing destruction with every swipe.
Well, what's interesting is that he dispatches the 6 very efficiently. There's
Right.
actually like no disturbance in the room when he kills them.
Right, but now he
Because-
has to make it look like it's
Right.
Yeah.
So then he like trashes everything, he knocks over the fire, he cuts up the ceiling, he does all this stuff. And then so that when Ushitora comes, they see like this, this carnage, this absolute massacre. In the meantime, he's taken the money he's gotten from Ushitora and told Kohei and Nui and their son, take this money
Take the
and
money.
go, right? And he comes outside, and they're
They're still
outside.
there.
But the
Prostrating
great thing
themselves to
is
him.
that when
Yeah.
he tells them that, he goes
Mhm.
inside and there's this long scene where he destroys the room.
Right.
You're like, oh, he's in there for like, 3 or 5 minutes.
Yeah.
No, easily.
They're still there. I'm like, come on.
Right. Get out of here. Yeah, well, that's what he says. He goes, what are you doing? They're like bowing before him.
That obviously goes to like the extreme politeness of Japanese society
yeah.
and the need that they feel to prostrate themselves before him. But he
Doesn't see himself.
doesn't
like that, yeah.
subscribe to the mores of society. So he's just frustrated
Right.
that they're not going. He's like, I risked myself for you.
Right, yeah, gave you the opportunity.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
And I could see the conversation between the husband and wife. I didn't prostrate myself.
Right.
Just, enough
Should
that
we get
I
a
felt-
receipt?
I didn't feel satisfied with that prostrating. I need to stay here and come out. Then we'll go. Immediately.
You know what's interesting is at this point, I mean, there is these action sequences, but there's very little blood. I mean, as you get into it toward the end, I think there's more.
Right. Well, there's in the scene where the guy's arm is chopped off, obviously
Right.
there's blood, and then
Right.
the scene when he destroys the house, there's blood on the walls, there's blood spatter.
Yeah, and there's the one little scene where the guy that gets taken out, but he's in the background.
Mhm.
And you see like a blood spurt, but other's it's not really.
Yeah, well, that's out of necessity, right? Because you got to show Mifune's skills as a swordsman, and you can't really, there's no CGI. You can't add in blood there, so it's got to be left to your imagination for the large.
Although, just interestingly, as a side note, if you guys ever watch Sanjuro, it has some of the most explicit blood spatter.
Oh, really?
Ever.
Oh, so they went
Especially-
overboard on the sequel? They were like, yeah.
Especially at the end of the movie, and the process of getting that blood spatter was legendary.
Oh, really? Now
yes.
I watch it. I thought maybe they're like, oh, Jeff said there's not enough blood. Let's up the ante in the next one.
Sanjuro thinks this is all taken care of, but of course Inosuke suspects him.
Yes. And if it wasn't for that prostrating farmer again,
Right, the damn farmer. Give me my money
and his
back.
letter, he's got to prostrate even after he's gone. In the letter, he's like, I'm not satisfied again with my prostrating. Here's a written version of my prostrating.
Right. We also wrote a couple hymns.
Yeah.
Right. So he sends a thank you note, and it gets delivered to Ganji, and Ganji gives it to Sanjuro, and Ganji's feeling very pleased with Sanjuro at this point, because he's like, you do have a heart, like you were just pretending. And Sanjuro's like, I don't want to read that. I don't. Sanjuro is not interested in feeling feelings. Okay, he does not want to read some guy's thank you note. But unfortunately, the timing is bad, because the thank you note is on the table when Inosuke comes into the shop to express his suspicions.
And this scene is excruciating. Like, before they actually take notice of the letter, it's like, to watch it is excruciating, waiting for them to take notice of the letter. Yeah.
Because it's coming.
So he tries to hide it with the sake bottle, and he sort of signals to Ganji subtly, like, basically, like, come take away the empty bottle, and you can take the note at the same time and put a fresh bottle down. But nope. Inosuke's already noticed.
Yes. Now, if he didn't try to do that, maybe they would have gotten away with it.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No. Inosuke was already suspicious of him, because he says in the conversation that they saw somebody saw the farmer and his wife and his child, escaping. So he was already, and he didn't trust Sandro to begin with, So I think he would have been caught out by Inosuke.
It's like the two big guns in town. Inosuke is the only other guy that always has his arms inside of his kimono.
Yeah, correct.
So it's almost like he's acting at being a tough guy. And Sanjuro is the real deal.
And then, Kurosawa does this thing where he just sort of cuts to the part where Sanjuro has already had the crap beaten out of him.
Yeah.
He just kind of jumps ahead.
Yeah.
Bring in Richard Keel, and with his giant ham hands, just grabbing
and head.
At one point, his hand covers Mifune's face and head.
Yeah, this guy's a monster. Yeah.
The scene, where Sandro sort of tries to figures out how he can escape, is so painful, not just because Sandro is in danger, but because it's the first time you really see this character as vulnerable.
Vulnerable, yeah.
And disheveled.
His man bun's gone.
Yeah, the hair comes down.
Man bun down.
Well, that was his top knot, his samurai top knot.
Jim always likes to refer to it as the man bun.
It is a traditional Japanese hairstyle, Jim.
It's a man bun.
Hey, I didn't say man bun. Jeff did. Jeff has a
Somehow you're getting the blame for it. I love
Jeff
it.
he's got a talent for saying something. It's like Bob Euchre. It's like and making me seem like the one that said it. Oh, Jim
Bob
says
Euchre.
man bun.
Man bun, Jim. It's all Jim's fault.
So one of the things we should note, though, is that while Sandro is beaten up, Ushitora kind of finally triumphs over Seibei. Right. Sandro manages to escape with the help of Ganji, of course, and the unwitting help of Inokichi, who carries the casket that Sandro is hiding in. While he's sort of beaten up and recovering in the graveyard, Ushitora has gone crazy looking for Sandro. He assumes that Seibei has him hidden. In the meantime, he kills Seibei, kills Orin, kills Yoichiro. That is finished. So what it means is that when Sandro comes out of hiding, he only has to take care of Ushitora.
Yeah, and that whole scene, that harrowing scene where he's crawling. I mean, he's
He
pretty
can't
beaten
even
up.
walk. He can't even
No,
walk.
but
And
he
they
find-
know
but he-
that's why they're trying to look for him.
The room that they leave him in is pretty empty, except for this chest, which he crawls into, and they never think to look in the chest. They're like, he magically escaped, and they go running away. And it's like, what's in the box?
Well, it's interesting because it's almost like everybody except Inosuke has sort of credited him with almost supernatural powers.
Right.
You know, they're so impressed by him, you know, from the few actions that he's taken in their presence.
And it hasn't, right. No, that's just it. His presence is enough to just kind of like, you know, like I said, he's badass, but he doesn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and then this all leads up to like the final confrontation, right, where the coffin maker comes to Sandro's hiding place and says they've taken Ganji, and now Sandro's heart is engaged again. He's like, damn.
Because Ganji, well, and the audience loves Ganji too. He's almost like a narrator that's explaining to the audience what's going on. So you've been with him throughout the movie.
No, I agree. Yep.
And then it comes to this wonderful, perfect in every way final confrontation.
Yes.
Where,
but there's before we get there, I would just want to bring up, there's a nice line that goes between Ganji and Sanjuro, where Sanjuro says to him, "Idiot, I'm not dying. There's a bunch of guys I have to kill."
Right. I have got a job to do, sorry.
Yeah.
Sandro comes to town, and he strolls into town with a knife, a dagger that he's been using is stuck inside his kimono, and a sword that the coffin maker brought him, and he's looking pretty unkempt, and Kurosawa has gone completely berserk with the wind machine.
Yeah, the weather is just, it's like friggin' Dorothy, hang on, because we're about to get blown away here.
Now, how much time do you think has transpired between when he's beaten and when this final battle occurs?
I mean,
it's
quite
7 minutes.
It's quite a while because his bruises have healed.
They've healed, so it's got to be several weeks.
Yeah,
he's like just laying low, so they probably just assume he's dead somewhere.
Right. So Kurosawa insisted on having huge amounts of wind in this final scene, and I don't know if you guys know this, but the wind machines that he used were made from former airplane propellers.
Nice. Well, it is pretty intense. I can't imagine how they even stood up.
And he insisted, especially to Nakadai and Mifune, that they have their eyes open during the scenes. So the wind was blowing, and Nakadai said he thought that the dust was made from sand and soybean flour, but it was actually, weirdly, it was brought in from a former firing range that had been scheduled for demolition. So they picked up all this dust from this former firing range and brought it in.
They shipped in dust.
They shipped in dust. Of course.
My house makes it every day.
It's Kurosawa. And they blew it in their faces. And the actors, had to rinse the sand out of their eyes in between every take. because Kurosawa didn't want them to blink too much.
Wow.
He wanted them to have their eyes wide open for this final confrontation.
Yikes.
But it's wonderful because there's Mifune by himself. Ganji's tied up at the end of the street, and there's Ushitora and Inosuke, Inokichi, and like about 7 of their men coming at him. And this, I can hear the music in my head right now, like as they're walking towards each other. The score is so perfect. And like I said, he keeps his arms inside his kimono, but when they go through his sleeves, it's all over. It's such a perfect scene. Inosuke says, "Don't come any closer." And he hitches his shoulders. He puts his arms through his sleeves, and he smiles that smile, that gunslinger smile. And I have seen this movie like 1,000 times, and every time my heart goes pop-pump when he smiles like that, because they're done. They are done. And then he uses the knife to take out Inosuke's firing arm.
Yep. Genius.
And then he very quickly dispatches everyone else with his sword. It's like there's no contest.
Yeah.
But he shows his heart again. Remember, he lets the one kid go from the beginning.
Which is a great callback to the beginning of the movie, because that's the kid, right?
Yes, it is.
Who was leaving his home, and
who says,
"Go home
"Mommy,
to your mama. Go home to your mama."
And
kid.
the kid calls out, "Mommy!" when
right,
and he
starts to go down.
And he says, "Go home and have a long, boring life eating gruel."
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so he runs away back to his farm.
Watch out what you wish for there, Luke Skywalker.
Yep.
Go back to your home.
Yeah, it's just that denouement is so perfect. And
now, could this be the first time in cinematic history where we get the bad guy death fake out? Where
you think he's dead? But he's
where he goes, "Just give me the pistol, please, so I can die with my pistol." And then, now you've given me the pistol.
Didn't see that coming.
Nakadai said he spent 3 days lying in a pool of blood, going, "Where am I? It's so dark." And afterwards, he said he broke out in a huge rash, like from laying in like the fake blood with the dust.
And the dust,
all over.
Probably the dust. Yeah. Sanjuro was going to walk off into the sunset, but he couldn't find it from all the dust in his eyes.
And then he, is the last dramatic cut where he frees Ganji from his bonds.
Literally.
And then he says, "Abayo," and then he walks away. The town will be quiet now.
Yeah, because I killed everybody.
Yes.
And now the movies back in the day, and it's not just Japanese movies, but it's they end so abruptly because the credits that you're given. The credits that you're given are often top loaded up front.
Right.
So usually movies back in these days just had the end title card, and that was it. Modern audiences, I think, expect that cathartic, okay, now I get a chance to breathe.
Yes, you get the closing, the credits, you get the music. You get
let me take this in, I'm going to get out, and then leave. But then you're just, boom, it's over. And your heart's still going. It's like you have no walk down time.
Kurosawa actually designed the costumes himself. Which is why Inosuke has a slightly off-kilter costume design with the Western scarf.
Yeah, right. Well, he also with the gun, so I got the impression he was like kind of picking up on that Western, right? So he got the he was. I went to Hollywood.
He had been away in a foreign country. Most significantly, Yojimbo was definitely first Japanese film. I don't know if it was the first film period, but to use sound effects for the sword slicing flesh.
Oh yeah, I did see them talking about that.
And this effects guy who was trying to come up with the sound kept trying all these different experiments. So he was like trying out slicing beef and pork and all this stuff. And meat was super expensive. So just
to slice it up for the sake of
so whatever he used ended up going like craft services for the crew.
Nice. I want to try this roast beef.
And then finally he found that the sound was correct when he chopped into a chicken, because you got the sound of flesh and then bone. But one of the reasons why they didn't use the sound effects prior, or a lot of gore, Yojimbo's quite gory for the time period, is because they were always concerned about bumping up against American censors.
Oh, really? The sound effects.
American censors were really strict because of the post-war agreements, when Japan surrendered. So there was a lot of American censorship of Japanese cinema, and one of the reasons why a lot of things were not shown or the sounds were because they were always worried that the censors would cut them off.
So just not even do it.
Yeah, so they went for it with this, and they were able to keep it.
Huh. That's interesting. So the sound effect, because the one thing I noticed, there's a scene where Sanjuro is sitting at the bottom of a staircase and he's waiting for, is it Ushitora to come down the stairs?
Right, Ushitora, yeah.
Ushitora, yeah. I've refused to say any of their names because I know I'm going to butcher them. But they purposely, this is like something they use in cartoons, which I actually refer to as Mickey Mousing, which is every time he took a step, it would be
sound.
Like the music would like,
yeah.
Boing, boing, boing,
Yes.
and it would become like more ominous as he came down the stairs. And I thought that was a real interesting choice because it is used within like animation.
Right.
So to use it in this style, in this movie, which is so concrete in reality, was just I don't know why that choice was, but it kind of like took me out because I'm like, he's Mickey Mousing down the stairs.
Well, I mean, I think it plays into, the overall tone that Kurosawa is trying to go for in this film, which is that it's a comedy.
Well, again, this is, again, like I said, if I didn't know, after doing my research that this was considered a comedy, I would just take it as an action movie. So it definitely gave me more insight watching it again.
So Mifune received the Best Actor award at the Venice Film Festival for this role. He should have won like 1 zillion awards everywhere for this. I always think of this part when I think of sort of like the essential Mifune, that it just sort of embodies all of his best qualities as an actor. So they filmed in 3 months. It started filming in January 14th, 1961. It wrapped April 16th. Kurosawa always edited during production, and Toho always liked to rush through the post-production. So the film actually premiered 4 days after Kurosawa wrapped filming.
Wow, that is crazy.
And now I need to talk about Sergio Leone.
And we're off.
I saved this for the end. So, if you've seen A Fistful of Dollars,
Clint Eastwood, man with no name,
then you know it bears a remarkable resemblance to Yojimbo.
Remarkable.
A very remarkable resemblance.
Blatant.
So Leone's wife said that the first time Leone saw Yojimbo, he had an idea to adapt it into a Western there and then. Now, Leone later in years tried to downplay Yojimbo's influence on Fistful of Dollars. He tried to claim that, it wasn't really as strong as, whatever. But Sergio Corbucci, who's another director, said he actually saw Leone, quote, slaving over a moviola machine, copying Yojimbo. So moviola is what the editors use to look at the film frame by frame. Copying Yojimbo, changing only the setting and details of the dialogue. And if you watch Fistful of Dollars, you will see that some of the shots are exactly like
Yojimbo. I get it being influenced, but to blatantly, we should have included this in our horrible remakes.
No, I'd be too angry.
No, I know you invested in
that you have to give 50-50.
Yeah, I know.
And Fistful of Dollars.
So Kurosawa sued him, correct?
Right. So what happened? The producers of Fistful of Dollars claimed that they tried to get permission. They never did. They tried to get permission to remake it. They never did. Decided to go ahead anyway and just hope that nobody noticed.
You at least give it. But even if you don't get official rights to remake something, at least give credit that it was influenced or story credit by.
So I want to read something to you guys, which was awesome. Okay. So if you're interested in the history of Kurosawa and Mifune, I highly recommend that you go and read. There's a dual biography called The Emperor and the Wolf, written by Stuart Galbraith. It's a gigantic tome. It's about 1,000 odd pages long, but it is literally the history of their whole lives, intertwined. And in the section on Yojimbo, he writes this. For his part, Kurosawa liked Leone's film, but in a letter to Leone was firm in his assertion that he be financially compensated. The latter said, Signor Leone, I have just had the chance to see your film. It is a very fine film, but it is my film. Since Japan is a signatory of the Berne Convention on International Copyright, you must pay me. Now, Sergio was so naive that he waved this letter around to everyone.
Hey, look what I got. He's a fan of my movie.
That was what it was. The letter was really offensive with its accusation of plagiarism, but he didn't seem to realize it. He couldn't get beyond the fact that the great director Kurosawa had written him and called his work a very fine film.
Because it's my movie.
The same thing would happen to us if I put in the Star Wars theme and John Williams sent us a letter. Look,
right, there you go.
Oh my God.
Right. So basically, Leone was just over the moon that Kurosawa had written to him. And Kurosawa was really, really mad at him. But Leone was like, look, the master liked my
I just need to plagiarize in order to get...
Pay attention to the first sentence. You're a fine film.
Exactly.
So what ended up happening was, especially, it was in dispute for a long time. Finally, Kurosawa ended up getting a settlement. But before that happened, the film was released in the U.S. with no screenplay credit at all, because there was a dispute, was going on for, it went through the court system for a long time. To the point where the producers of the film tried to claim that Kurosawa had actually based Yojimbo on an Italian play. So they were trying to claim that Kurosawa was plagiarizing, and what they had done was okay, basically, because of that. So anyway,
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the hell out of it.
I'm so glad. I feel like you joined my cult.
So I'm back in the club now. I will have to say I had to look up. I finished this movie and I'm like, hold on, there's not a single person in here named Yojimbo.
Right, because it means bodyguard.
Well, they don't tell you that. They'll tell you that on the sleeve of the DVD.
Right. I know. I hate it when people refer to his character as Yojimbo.
That's because you don't know any better, right?
That's his name or his
character.
That's like calling the Frankenstein monster Frankenstein.
Right.
Yeah. His name was Bob, right?
It was the monster, according to Peter Boyle. Yeah.
I thought it was the monster.
So this was also nominated for an Academy Award, Best Costume Design. So at least they watched it. At least somebody watched it.
Well, what was interesting
what was it up against?
Well, it was a huge moneymaker in Japan. This was easily Kurosawa's biggest hit in Japan, financially. It was a massive, massive moneymaker for Toho. But it was received with mixed reviews in the US. A lot of critics just dismissed it. They wrote it off as a Western, which is so insulting because it's so much more than its Western influences. Kurosawa's favorite director was John Ford.
Right.
And he has said that he had been, he had learned from the grammar of the Western, but there's a lot more going on in this film than just sort of Western film trope.
That's interesting because he's influenced by the Westerns, but then the Westerns pick this up and copied from.
Yeah.
So it's like this feeding frenzy on each other.
Yeah, Westerns were never the same after this.
Right.
No, but Clint Eastwood, right?
Right, and that's the whole thing. Is he really created his own thing, and that's what I meant when I said earlier, looking at it now, people are like, oh, well, there's so many movies like this, but it was subversive at the time. This was not the kind of film that was made about samurai or even about Western characters.
But is that why maybe it was so dismissed or up front? Because you didn't have, if I'm an American reviewer and I'm only comparing this to other Westerns.
Mhm.
I don't have the backstory. I don't have the history. Maybe, you know, Japanese culture is not infiltrated like it is now, where, you know, you got entire, you know, sections in your movie library that you can go and watch. So they didn't really have that point of reference to fall back on. And again, you just watch it as a movie like I did the first time, and you're like, oh, it's, you know, you take it at face value.
Well, more than anything, it seemed like critics were comparing it either to Seven Samurai or to Rashomon, which are more serious works. So they were basically saying that Kurosawa had made something throwaway.
Yeah, but
And
did Seven Samurai come out
much earlier?
Oh, it did.
Hmm. Yeah, and Rashomon was the first picture to like sort of get
54.
international.
Wow. Okay.
Rashomon was his first picture to sort of get international acclaim. So a lot of reviewers compared it unfavorably to Rashomon.
But it was so unconventional that the reason that U.S. critics kind of dismissed it. But this is, I'm sure, why it was a massive hit in Japan. Because there it was also seen as unconventional, but it was so against the grain that it was something new and exciting, and fresh. Especially Mifune.
I mean, Mifune had always played a lot more unconventional characters for Kurosawa, but this was the first film, I think, too, that really caught the attention of the international audience, where people really took note of, sort of, like I said, sort of like his power and his charisma, his humor, just all the qualities that he has. I always consider this just essential Mifune.
Right. Now, when did you take note of this, Christina?
I do remember the first time I got an opportunity to see it on the big screen.
Oh, that would be impressive.
14 years ago. And I know this because I was pregnant with my son at the time. It was like 7 months pregnant. And the Music Box Theater did a Samurai Film Festival. They did a week of Samurai double features. And Yojimbo was a double feature with Seven Samurai.
Wow.
Which was amazing. And so Seven Samurai is a long movie.
Right.
So
how did you sit there pregnant through two?
Well, what happened was I went at 4. The first movie was at 4, right? So I was only working half days at the time. So I went, and my husband wasn't out of work yet. So I went to the first showing. So I saw Yojimbo. And then he came after. So like he came basically when Seven Samurai was starting. So when Yojimbo finished, there was a little break in between. I ran to the restroom because 7 months pregnant, that's all you're thinking about. And then Seven Samurai actually has an intermission because it's such a long movie. And I had seen the movie enough times on video that I knew when the intermission was coming.
It's coming.
And the Music Box it's a little theater, so they only have, in the bathroom there's only 2 stalls. And I thought, I'm not going to be able to wait, So I leaned over and told my husband, like, as soon as the intermission comes up, I'm running to the bathroom.
Get out of my way.
And like the second that screen went black, I was out of there.
I assume they have comfortable seats.
No. Yeah, it's an old theater. I mean, they could, the seats are quite old. That is not
Music Box, not the comfort box.
That is not their best feature. They have many other good qualities.
You said nothing but good things about the Music Box. Now you're poo-pooing their seats.
Well, I mean, the seats are old.
Hey, listen, while they're closed right now, they should be redoing those seats.
You know what? Well, they're the kind of seats, that used to spring back, but now they kind of just
flop.
Yeah.
That's like my body. Just flops.
I did read that not only was Sergio Leone heavily influenced by this, John Belushi was as well. He took his samurai
Is that where his samurai character came from
Mifune, yeah. Buck Henry used to host Saturday Night Live all the time in the early seasons. And he did a sketch with Belushi as the samurai. And Belushi was supposed to end the sketch, and it was supposed to freeze frame with him uppercutting the sword and pretending to disembowel Buck Henry or strike Buck Henry, and he actually came too close and sliced him on the forehead. And Buck Henry spent the rest of the show with a huge bandage on his forehead. So not as good a swordsman, I'm sure, as Mifune was.
A little more practice.
It's funny though. You can see on screen how strong Mifune is, but actors who have had to do fight scenes with him said that getting hit by him was most terrifying thing in the world. Like even Mifune, even at half power, would hit you so hard, like your ears would be ringing.
I think acting against him would be the most terrifying thing.
Right? You win. Okay.
In Sanjuro, the sequel to Yojimbo, there's a scene where he smacks like one of these younger samurai for being foolish, and the actor who played that samurai is actually the same actor who played Kohei, the farmer, the downtrodden farmer whose wife is taken from him in Yojimbo. And he said, like, when Mifune hit him, he said, when you see me stagger back, he's like, that's not acting.
You rung my bell.
Yeah.
Damn.
So do you want to announce it, Christina?
Yojimbo is officially inducted into the 5 Bucket Club.
Yes.
Yeah. But yes, I wish people could see like how excited I am about this. I hope they can hear it in my voice.
Yeah, I know. As I said a couple of weeks ago, don't think you can leave now that you
That's right. I
you
got
showed
one
your
episode.
hand. Yeah.
There's still a few things I'd like to talk about. So.
What? I thought you just liked our company. She's using us, Jim. She's using us.
Yeah.
That's all right. Fine. That's fair.
Yeah.
Used.
This is, I mean, to me, this is just one of the greatest movies ever made. And I hope that if you have not seen it, that you will please go out and see it. And
absolutely.
I'm glad that you guys enjoyed it.
Only because you watch this movie, you're like, oh, that movie stole that, and that movie stole that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it
is
definitely
very influential.
You get more out of it the more that you see it, because there's a lot going on. So it wasn't the first time I'd seen it, but you pick up on things the more that you watch movies like this that have so much detail to them, and it rewards you the more times you watch it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it within his performance, because it is so kind of low key and he kind of plays it cool, but there's a lot going on there. So yeah.
I mean, do you think, Clint Eastwood's career literally would not exist without this movie?
Yeah.
Well, you can't blame him, though.
No, but I mean, it's not just that. It's that Eastwood went on to basically play this type.
This character, yeah.
You're right. Not just in Leone's films, but in lots of other films, this kind of. But the thing about Eastwood's portrayal, I think, is that Eastwood does not have Mifune's humor. He doesn't have that kind of layer. And kind of just on principle, I will not watch A Fistful of Dollars because it makes me angry. But I will say that I have liked other Sergio Leone films, especially Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But I'm sure that has more to do with Lee Van Cleef.
Yeah. I love A Few Dollars More because of Klaus Kinski.
You like a Klaus Kinski obsession. I don't think I've ever heard anybody mention Klaus Kinski as often.
The man is bizarre. He is a human anachronism.
Wow.
One of these days we'll cover a Klaus Kinski movie.
There you go.
Directed by Werner Herzog, right?
Yes. Of course.
So what are we doing now that we've watched Yojimbo?
That's it. We're done. We're wiping our hands of this. There's not another single movie out there that we can discuss.
But we are forging on in the midst of this pandemic. We still don't have any new movies unless something comes our way on demand or streaming.
I looked it up. There's nothing.
Yeah,
nothing.
So we're getting
Scoob
creative. We're getting creative again. So next week we're starting another series, a 3-part series, taking a movie that has had a remake done of it, and we're gonna review both of those back to back. And first up is Jeff, and this next episode is going to be his pick. So Jeff, take it away. What are we doing?
We're actually calling this series "Why." Why? So yeah, I think the premise of this is that we had a movie. We kind of talk about it here with Yojimbo and the blatantly stolen Fistful of Dollars. And I am going to take a much beloved movie from 1968, Planet of the Apes, and we are going to pair it with the abysmal 2001 Tim Burton debacle known as Planet of the Apes. So I'm wearing my heart on my sleeve with that one. So a lot of promise. Tim Burton, he was pretty much, could do no wrong. Danny Elfman, Mark Wahlberg. I don't know what happened, but
I think he was coming off of Sleepy Hollow with this movie as well, right? I think that was his last movie before Planet of the Apes.
Yeah.
Sleepy
I have to
Hollow
look
is
that up. That sounds 98, 99,
Yeah.
somewhere in there. Yeah.
So he was at the peak of his powers.
Yeah, no, he could do no wrong.
Until he made this.
I don't know what happened. I'm going to have to do some serious digging because I was funny because I was just listening to a Danny Elfman interview on a podcast, and every one of his movies was mentioned except for this, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to use this as a weapon. Even he hates it. And then in the last 2 minutes of the interview, he brought up the fact that he had so much fun doing the soundtrack for this because of the percussion. And I'm like, doesn't make it good.
We'll be the judge of that next week.
So yeah, Planet of the Apes and Planet of the Apes.
So
Come
as
back,
always, come back, listen.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Be safe. Wash your hands.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Bye.
Hello, everybody. If you liked the podcast you just heard, then please follow TMI on all of our social media outlets. First and foremost, email us at tmipodcast2018@gmail.com. That is tmipodcast2018@gmail.com.
And you can follow us on Twitter at TMI_podcast2018. Stop over, say hi, give us a compliment. We'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Make sure you follow us on Instagram as well, which is also TMI_podcast2018.
And of course, we are on Facebook, facebook.com/TMI Podcast 2018. And it should be noted, we also have a community page, so join the forum.
And if you like to watch YouTube, you can see us at TMI Podcast 2018, all one word. Look for the popcorn bucket.
Popcorn bucket. Or you could just go to our website, which has every link there, TMIConfessionalspodcast.com. And we'll see you at the concession stand.
We'll save some popcorn for you.
Gojira!